Well, I really thought I'd be done making lore builds at this point. Like maybe I'd move on a little bit. Maybe I'd make some builds that are, halfway decent. Or played some other games that aren't Dark Souls 3. But here I am, not playing other games. Still playing Dark Souls 3 the way I've always played it. And in the same way as I've done all these videos, style, fashion, and lore will always take precedence over practicality and efficiency. So without much further ado, this is Windswept Rhea, a SL40 plus 4 dex build. Sound familiar? It is. But now, it's even less efficient than before. Off you go. So the stats of this character aren't really anything too special. All it really is reaching the base requirements for the Storm Curved Sword, which is the main weapon that this build is focused around. Now, a pretty big disclaimer here. The Storm Curved Sword is not that good at low levels. I would say overall, it's a pretty damn good curved sword for, the larger class of curved swords. But at low levels, it does not very good damage, and you can't buff it, which is where a lot of your damage comes from at around SL40 plus 4. That all being said, this weapon does have some pretty incredible properties to it. For one, its weapon art knocks down, and I'm talking flinging other characters backwards. It's not a pancake, it's a knockback. So as a result, a lot of what I do with this build is try to knock people off ledges they can't survive. And I mean a lot. It is so incredibly satisfying. And yeah, I know, if I wanted to do this more efficiently, I could use a build that uses force and just force people off ledges constantly. But this is a little bit more fun. It requires a little bit more planning, a little bit more angling mid-combat, and it rewards, good spacing and good skilled play, not just who can press L2 with a talisman fastest. Now, it doesn't always work perfectly, but it works a lot of the time. Sometimes you'll end up just stunning your opponents and they'll do a little step back, but often enough, if you're on the edge of a cliff, that's enough to knock people off that as well. Much like the Karthus Curved Sword, the Storm Curved Sword also true combos its weapon art from its R2. So you can do R2, full weapon art, and knock someone down. There is a hidden property to the knockdown though, in that you can get out of the laying down pose much faster if you spam roll. And if you don't get out of that, you're technically vulnerable. So feasibly, I haven't achieved this, but feasibly, you could do R2, full weapon art, into another R2 if your opponent doesn't realize that they need to roll to get out of that laying down position. I've also heard and noticed that the weapon art comes out a little bit faster than other large curved swords with a similar weapon art, just without the wind attached to it as well. But for me personally, the wind is the most crucial part. It ties all this character together with its lore, but I'll get to that in just a little bit. The last thing that's nice about the Storm Curved Sword is that it is so damn long. I believe it is actually longer than the Karthus Curved Sword, but without the stamina consumption penalty that the Karthus Curved Sword got when it got nerfed. So you have that nice, large curved sword running attack that has just a massive hitbox. You have an extremely long curved sword that doesn't consume all of your stamina in 3 swings. You have the weapon art that comes out pretty fast and knocks people down, which is, in general, pretty rare. And you have 2 different types of R1s between the one-handed and two-handed movesets. So yeah, I've really fallen in love with this weapon as of late. It's the perfect balance of not very good, but still somehow kinda good. Overall, it is extremely fun. Now, I originally got this idea from another player named Sare. Sare is a complete sweetie and also makes some really interesting builds, in case you guys don't already know of them. But basically, Sare invaded me with this build that was using like windy type weapons, stuff like the Storm Curved Sword, but also the Storm Ruler, as well as some of the Dragon Tailbone weapons that have a cool weapon art that knocks people down. The tailbone weapons are pretty much only good for their weapon art, but they still are pretty funny. You get into some pretty silly tailbone fights with other invaders who kind of have the same idea in mind. But the funny thing about these fights is that they mostly just turn into like weird position battles. They don't seem to have really any like skill curve to them, but they are pretty goofy. And that's kind of what wind does in this game. It tends to knock people over. And none of the weapons that use wind are particularly good outside of maybe the Storm Curved Sword, but they are like a really unique feature, and I've even heard from some of the behind closed doors footage from Elden Ring that there will be wind type attacks in Elden Ring. So with Sarah's build and, the promise of more wind in the future in these games, I set out to make a build that was almost like airborne. I wanted it to be light on its feet and just a constant flurry of blades and wind. And that's kind of who Rhea is. She uses an offhand shotel, which complements very nicely with several different weapons. I personally really like using it with the Storm Curve Sword because you have the fast Curve Sword one-handed moveset in the offhand and the heavy Curve Sword moveset in the main hand. So when people try to roll underneath the heavier Curve Sword attacks, they get caught by the shotel in the offhand. I've also really enjoyed using with the katana. It kind of covers up all the things the katana can't do, which is mostly horizontal slashes. And that's kind of what the shotel does with everything. It catches people who try to roll around your main hand weapon. So it does best when paired with something that only has more vertical or more narrow attacks. It also can parry. Not well, but it can parry. Which, as I've talked about before, is just nice as sort of a psychological threat of the parry, instead of actually going for parries all the time. And don't think I've forgotten you lore nerds out there. I've made several deliberate choices in making this build to make it more, lore friendly and fit with my kind of silly headcanon for this character. Essentially, Rhea wishes she could fly. She obviously can't, but, she really wishes she could. She adorns herself in trinkets and funny little charms and odd tailbone weapons of failed dragons, hoping that maybe all these together can make her fly. But as Rhea has discovered, and something that Yorshka has still yet to figure out, humans cannot fly. And so as a result, she uses her tools of wind to experiment on a great number of victims. But as always, the answer to the question, can humanity take to the air, is always no. And we've seen that play out many times in Dark Souls. The only ways our characters ever able to fly is if they get picked up by some weird bat-winged demons or perhaps a giant crow here and there. So yeah, that's Windswept Rhea. It's a very fun build to play with, and using some weapons that I hardly ever use, and using fashion that I hardly ever use. So it's a nice little merging of the two. But the real reason I wanted to make this video and get it out now was to say thank you guys. I recently hit 500 subscribers, which is, 5 times the amount I ever even set out to achieve. When I first started this channel, I made a lifetime goal to hit 100 subscribers, and if I got that, I'd be pretty happy. That would be like the amount of engagement that I wanted, and to hit 500 is just way beyond what I ever thought this would be. So I'm quite humbled. I know it's just 500. It's not a lot to some people, but it is a lot to me. And I guess I really just want you guys to know how much I appreciate you. This channel started with the premise that it was going to be based around the best aspects of the PvP community for FromSoft games, and I feel like I've achieved that goal to a degree. I really value the many fantastic interactions I've had with people along the way, and while I could turn this last little section of the video into like the real subscribers or the friends we made along the way kind of joke that, has been run thoroughly into the ground, I won't do that. You've been spared from an unfunny old joke. You're welcome. But actually, thank you guys so much, and thanks for watching. I am serious about how much I appreciate you guys, and I hope you all realize how much of an impact you all have on me. So, once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.